A new chapter in British politics as UKIP march into Parliament with their first elected MP. Former Conservative Douglas Carswell storms to victory in Clacton in UKIP colours.
Tonight, people gave their backing to Ed Miliband's plans.
Labour hang on in Haywood, but Nigel Farage's party comes within a whisker of victory.
I have no idea what is going to happen in 7 months' time any more than you do.
Also tonight, the Taliban's target wins the Nobel Peace Prize, Malala's extraordinary achievement.
It's my message to children all around the world that they should stand up for their rights.
The major breakthrough for diabetes sufferers that could end daily jabs and help save lives.
And the Queen of the Screen is made an honorary dame by Her Majesty at Buckingham Palace.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Charlene White and Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. In both victory and defeat, UKIP have stunned Westminster and taken a seat at its top table. The victory was in Clacton, a thumping by-election win over the Tories, giving the party its first elected MP. The defeat was in the Labour heartland, Haywood and Middleton. It was so unexpectedly narrow that Nigel Farage says it has shaken up British politics.
Well, today, UKIP's political rivals are all licking their wounds. In Clacton, the Tory defector Douglas Carswell took 21,000 votes, 60% of the total. Support for the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems fell sharply. Labour held Haywood and Middleton, but only just, with UKIP only a few hundred votes behind. We'll report from Haywood in just a moment, but first, Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp on UKIP's triumph in Clacton.
It's like being second row, isn't it?
Clacton town centre this morning was not a place to be if you value space. Inside this scrum, Nigel Farage and his party's first elected MP.
I hear what you say. I won't let you down. You're my boss.
Douglas Carswell's victory here in a safe Conservative seat has just made the result of the general election that little bit more difficult to predict.
I have no idea what is going to happen in 7 months' time any more than you do. Whether Mr Miliband is now going to match the referendum.
You do have an idea that this will change the way in which people are going to vote in the next election?
It's a perception thing, yeah. It's a perception. You know, we saw that for years with the Lib Dems. You know, in the early 90s, people thought the Lib Dem vote was a wasted vote. When they began to think the Lib Dems could win in constituencies, they began to win.
You're the new Lib Dems?
Not in policy.
However Mr Farage might characterise his party's success, it made for a miserable night for the Conservatives here, where yesterday 21,000 put a cross next to UKIP. 3 of them were getting coffee this morning after staying up for the result. All 3 called themselves supporters of Margaret Thatcher. All 3 voted UKIP.
I've always voted Conservative, but I would say I probably would be to the right wing of the Conservative Party historically.
Well, what was it? Was it you want to put out of Europe, or was it immigration?
I think there are issues. I would love to have a vote in Europe. I'm 51, I've never had a vote in Europe.
I'm really hoping that the UK Independence Party are actually going to work for the people and not for big industry.
To stop voters like that from switching to UKIP, David Cameron has tried insulting the party. He once called them closet racists and fruitcakes. He's promised similar policies, a referendum on Europe. Now, however, the Conservatives say if you vote UKIP, you get Labour.
And this speaks to a wider truth, which is that if you vote UKIP, you're in danger of getting a Labour government with Ed Miliband as Prime Minister, Ed Balls as Chancellor, and you'll get no action on immigration, no European referendum.
Well, we're pretty much done, aren't we?
The political momentum in England, at least, is with this man right now. His opponents underestimated him. Now they're wondering, quite simply, how to stop him. Chris Shipp, ITV News, Clacton-on-Sea.
So, Labour clinched it in Greater Manchester just. UKIP coming a close second and a real threat to the Labour stronghold there. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is live in Haywood for us this evening. Carl, is this win actually worse for Labour than the loss of Clacton was for the Tories?
Well, I think it probably was, because it was such a huge shock. I mean, this is as bad as you can get and still just about win. So when Ed Miliband came to visit here and stood on the steps of the library behind me a little bit earlier today. He didn't even want to answer questions from reporters, which were all about why did you do so very, very badly? They fought their campaign on the NHS here, and that was what he wanted to talk about.
This is a fight for the everyday working people of Britain. This is a fight for the next generation. This is a fight for the National Health Service. This is a fight against disillusionment and despair. This is a fight for the working people of Britain, and this is a fight I am determined to win. Thank you very much.
Well, it certainly is a fight. He knows he's got one of those on his hands. Now look, UKIP are saying things like they are now the main challengers to Labour north of the Watford gap. In truth, there are only a few seats that they can really target at the general election with any hope of winning at all. In truth, Labour are still very much the strongest party. But what UKIP are doing here is they are changing the dynamic, they are changing the debate. Mr Miliband had to talk about immigration here. There are those within his party who are now pushing him to say that he would support a referendum on whether Britain should be in or out of Europe. All things that Mr Miliband wouldn't ordinarily want to do. So although UKIP might not be getting ready to take many seats in this part of the world, they are certainly changing the political weather.
Carl, thank you.
Well, let's return to our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, who's in Clacton. So, Chris, an historic night for UKIP. We've got the general election coming up in May. So what will this mean over the next 7 months?
I wish I could tell you. I mean, you look at any opinion poll at the moment and it shows that the general election's already predicted to be a very close finish. The result from here, well, it's really anyone's guess. UKIP have shown that they can take devastating chunks out of safe Tory seats like this one in Essex, and they predict others up the eastern coast of England. They've also shown they can come, as Carl's just been explaining to us, they can come within a whisker of winning a seat in a Labour heartland. The Tories, however, I think have got more to worry about. More votes are coming from the Tories going to UKIP. One senior backbencher, Sir Edward Lee, said tonight that if Mr Cameron's serious about change, well, maybe he should end the coalition. But the Tory battle continues. Just over in that direction, Mr Farage and his new MP will go and campaign in the Rochester by-election tomorrow. That's where another Tory MP has defected to UKIP. And right now, no one is willing to predict about this UKIP juggernaut when and if it will stop.
Thanks, Chris.
To other news. It will be at least next week before we know exactly when or even how people entering Britain will be screened for Ebola. Last night, the government announced checks would be stepped up at the busiest entry points. Delay is causing confusion and criticism, as our correspondent Dan Rivers reports.
In a sign of just how jumpy authorities are around the world about Ebola, this was the extraordinary scene on a US flight this week after a man sneezed and then joked he had the virus. In Britain, there have been no scares like this yet, but we're told there will be heightened measures at UK airports. Not men in suits, but men with clipboards asking questions. But as this traveller discovered today, there were no signs of the new screening regime at Heathrow. Only yesterday, ministers were insisting it wasn't necessary. Today, the Prime Minister was explaining why it was.
We listen to the medical advice and we act on that advice, and that's why we're introducing these screening processes at the appropriate ports and airports.
That advice on screening passengers came from Britain's chief medical officer, who said in a statement, "It is right to consider what further measures could be taken to ensure that any potential cases arriving in the UK are identified as quickly as possible. Rapid access to healthcare services by someone infected with Ebola is not only important for their health, but also key to reducing the risk of transmission to others." Tonight, Downing Street revealed it won't be until at least next week that the screening will begin. But this specialist in tropical diseases says it won't make any difference.
Screening at airports, I don't think any medical person has supported that. It's purely a government thing. I think the government wanted to be seen to be doing something, so they've done something, but they didn't really think through the reasons for doing it.
For many, this new screening process is the first tangible sign that Ebola isn't just confined to West Africa, that it does have the potential to spread to every country, including the UK. The government is just hoping that passengers will be reassured by these new measures, not unsettled by them. Dan Rivers, ITV News, London.
More details emerged today about one of the 5 men arrested this week suspected of terrorism offences. ITV News understands he is called Yasir Mahmood, a 20-year-old from West London. He went to the same London school as 3 of the other men arrested. Officers have until Tuesday to question the 5 men.
And the broadcaster Paul Gambaccini will face no further action over alleged historical sex offences. The broadcaster was arrested in October last year. The 65-year-old has always denied the claims.
Malala Yousafzai, the schoolgirl campaigner shot in the head for defying the Taliban, was awarded a share of the Nobel Peace Prize today, the youngest ever winner.
Her passionate promotion of girls' education in Pakistan showed great personal courage, the committee said. She was appropriately at school when she was told the news. Rupert Evelyn reports.
By her own admission, she wasn't entirely focused on her chemistry class this morning. Instead, Malala Yousafzai was wondering if she might win the Nobel Peace Prize.
I was totally sure that I haven't won it. But then suddenly one of my teachers came to the class and she called me and she said, I have something important to tell you. And I was totally surprised when she told me that, congratulations, you have won the Nobel Peace Prize.
For the 17-year-old who's championed the rights of women to receive an equal education, the business of commenting on her award would have to wait until she'd finished her classes.
I decided that I would not leave my school. Rather, I would finish my school time. I went to the physics lesson, I went to the English lessons, and it was totally like, I considered it as a normal day.
It's almost 2 years to the day since she was shot on a school bus in Pakistan's Swat Valley by Taliban gunmen. It was a bullet to the brain intended to silence her that has only served to add volume to her campaign. Malala Yousafzai has been awarded the Peace Prize jointly this year with Kailash Satyarthi, who campaigns against the use of child labour in India.
Education is the only solution. Education first. Thank you.
Whether she's in the United Nations or in front of royalty, Malala's message is consistent, and today was no exception.
So through my story, I want to tell other children all around the world that they should stand up for their rights. They should not wait for someone else.
In the arms of her family, she presents an image of an ordinary schoolgirl. But as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, she's now in extraordinary company, sharing the winners list with the likes of Barack Obama and Nelson Mandela. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Birmingham.
Still to come.
All systems go for baby.
On the wards with midwives in England preparing to deliver their first strike.
The medical breakthrough offering new hope for diabetes patients.
And no show in North Korea. What happened to North Korea's mysterious leader?
Those stories and more after this very short break. Welcome back. On Monday, for the first time, midwives in England are going to go on strike. Women giving birth will still be attended, but for 4 hours, antenatal and postnatal appointments will be disrupted. They're joining a mass walkout by health workers after the government refused them a 1% pay rise. Our correspondent Debbie Edward joined midwives at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle to see the daily pressures they face.
Come on, keep using your gas. Brilliant.
Bringing a new life into the world requires a calm, steadying influence. Words which comfort and encourage.
Come on, you're going to have a baby shortly. Well done. OK, do we know what we're having? A little girl. A little girl.
Maggie Payton has been a midwife for 24 years. We joined her on a 12-hour night shift, during which she never stopped.
We're in labour. It's been contracting all day and we're now 5 centimetres. So brilliant.
All systems go.
All systems go for baby.
Maggie was one of 4 midwives on shift at Newcastle's birthing centre.
Look at your mummy.
All of them helped deliver a baby on the night we were there, while also fielding dozens of calls.
Yeah, and is baby moving all okay? Lovely.
Staying late and not getting a break are a common occurrence.
Sometimes we've had some shifts where we've had, 15 women to be assessed, and that means all of those women have actually rang in earlier, so you're having to juggle telephone assessments, caring for women.
There are a total of 8 maternity wards at the Royal Victoria Infirmary, staffed by 37 midwives.
There's no such thing as an average day on a maternity ward. A midwife here could deliver as many as 3 babies in a shift, sometimes over the phone. And the work doesn't stop once a baby has been delivered. On this postnatal ward, midwives are caring for mothers and babies for whom the birthing process hasn't been so straightforward.
But on Monday, for the first time, many routine ante- and postnatal appointments across England will be cancelled as midwives go on strike.
That's lovely, so it's nice and normal, good.
House calls like this one targeted by a protest at the government's refusal to give them a 1% pay rise.
I'd like more midwives to come into the job, but to get, paid for the job that they do and get recognition for the very valuable jobs that midwives do.
Maggie was run off her feet but says she wouldn't have it any other way. No salary increase could rival the joy of seeing a baby born.
Well done, congratulations.
Monday's strike is about fair pay for a job where every day this is the reward. Debbie Edward, ITV News, Newcastle.
Scientists say they've made a major breakthrough in the treatment of type 1 diabetes that could eventually end the need for regular insulin injections. They've created an insulin-producing cell that works in mice and they hope will work in humans too. Sejal Karia has more.
Jenny Greaves has lived with type 1 diabetes since she was a child. Every day she has to test her blood sugar levels to decide if she needs to inject insulin. It keeps her alive.
I can't really remember life without these pieces of kit, and as fantastic and as small as they are and inconspicuous in that way, they are my lifelines. Without them I would eventually die.
But these stem cells could put an end to the daily dose of injections for more than 300,000 people like Jenny who live with type 1 diabetes, and there may also be a step towards a cure. People with type 1 diabetes can't produce insulin, which controls blood sugar. That's because the body's immune system has destroyed the cells in the pancreas which create it, known as beta cells. Now scientists have developed a way of growing new stem cells to replace them. They would be harvested in a laboratory before being transplanted into the patient. The hope is they would then be accepted by the body, function normally and end the daily dose of insulin injections. Douglas Melton is the Harvard scientist who led the research. He's dedicated his life to finding a cure since his son Sam was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a baby.
It's fun to think about a day when people won't be using syringes or insulin pumps anymore, that they'll have a natural mechanism of their body's own cells making the insulin they need.
For now, patients will still have to use their insulin jabs. This research has only been tested on mice. Human trials are expected to begin in the next few years. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
The body of murdered schoolgirl Alice Gross was wrapped in a bag and weighed down in a river, a coroner said today. Alice's mother, Rosalind, in the middle here, was at court as the inquest was opened and then adjourned. Teenager's body was found in the River Brent in West London a month after she went missing.
And a man is facing jail after pleading guilty to gate-crashing a high-speed race on the famous Brands Hatch circuit in his Volkswagen Polo. Jack Cottle joined the race midway through and hit speeds of up to 200 miles per hour at the racetrack in Kent. Speculation as to the whereabouts of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has intensified. His absence from one of the biggest celebrations of the year today added to rumours that he has been deposed or is gravely ill. From Beijing, our China correspondent Lucy Watson reports.
It's North Korea's state television, but showing sight nor sound of the country's supreme leader, as the nation celebrates the founding of his Workers' Party without him. Kim Jong-un rules the most isolated country on earth, yet hasn't been seen for 37 days, missing a number of high-profile events. In a democracy, his disappearance would generate curiosity, but in the most secretive state in the world, it breeds rumours.
This is the North Korean embassy, and outside the country the speculation is that Kim Jong-un may have been overthrown in a planned revolt by power brokers within the country, or that it could have been a more subtle takeover, leaving him to be more of a figurehead in the future, or more simply that he's suffering from an illness. But the longer these theories persist and he fails to make any public appearances, then the more likely it is that the problem is a serious one.
A problem that's worse than just a leg injury he suffered in the past. But it's a theory being dismissed by South Korea and the man in charge of stabilising relations with the North. Kim Jong-un's leadership is normal as usual, he says. But experts in China disagree.
It's pretty extraordinary he hasn't been seen in a month. If another month goes by, then we can assume that there's been drastic change in the regime.
So it's now a watch on whether Kim Jong-un will reappear and how soon, because in such an opaque nation, almost any scenario is plausible. Lucy Watson, ITV News, Beijing.
And finally, she may be a Hollywood superstar, but it was Angelina Jolie's campaign to end sexual violence in war zones that earned her an honorary damehood from the Queen today.
The Oscar-winning actress received it personally at Buckingham Palace, a rare honour for a foreigner to receive. Her husband, Brad Pitt, and their children were there as well to meet the Queen, although not photographed.
Now, on tonight's ITV News at 10, the newly installed boss of Microsoft and his controversial advice to women to not ask for a pay rise, but instead rely on karma.
It's not really about asking for the raise, but knowing and having faith that the system will actually give you the right raises as you go along.
And FA chairman Greg Dyke's new blueprint to make England football world champs again.
Join Charlene and me again at 10, but for now, bye-bye.
Goodbye.